Adeline Hale died at exactly 11:58 p.m. on a Tuesday. Or at least that's what it felt like when her ex-boyfriend's wedding photo loaded on her phone. Him in a slate gray tuxedo, with his arm around Jessa, Adeline's former best friend. Marcus and Jessa looked happy. They radiated the kind of effortless joy that made Adeline's chest physically ache. She should have been numb to it by now. Should have done a lot of things differently. Instead, she was lying in bed, doom-scrolling at midnight, when her phone screen went white-hot in her hands. The light emanating from her phone had substance to it, almost liquid, pouring out of the device and spreading across her hands like something alive. Adeline dropped the phone with a startled yelp, but the light kept coming. It flooded her bedroom in waves, swallowing her unmade bed. The temperature plummeted so fast her breath came out in visible clouds. She tried to stand up, but her legs wouldn't move. The light was inside her now, behind her eyes and in her lungs, pulling her apart molecule by molecule. She couldn't scream because she couldn't breathe because her body wasn't solid anymore. Wasn't anything except this terrible sensation of falling through ice water that burned instead of froze. Then everything stopped. The silence hit her like a physical blow. Adeline's eyes snapped open and immediately recognized that something was catastrophically wrong. She wasn't in her bed. This bed was enormous, a 4-poster monstrosity with heavy velvet curtains the color of wine and sheets that felt like actual silk against her skin. The ceiling above her was stone, rough-hewn and ancient-looking. A fireplace large enough to stand in crackled with actual flames. Medieval. The words surfaced through her panic. Everything looked aggressively, impossibly medieval, like she'd fallen into a Renaissance fair that someone had taken way too seriously. "You're finally here." Adeline's head whipped toward the voice, and her heart stopped. A man sat in a chair beside the bed, watching her with eyes that reflected the firelight in a way that human eyes absolutely should not. They were amber, bright and predatory, set in a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He had dark hair that brushed his collar, sharp cheekbones, and a scars that cut through his left eyebrow and continued down to his cheek. His shoulders were broad enough to make the chair he sat in look child-sized, and he wore clothing that matched the medieval insanity of the room, leather and dark wool, embroidered with silver thread. Adeline's voice came out as a croak. "Careful." He leaned forward and Adeline saw the weapons. Multiple weapons. A sword strapped to his hip, knives at his thighs, something that might have been a dagger tucked into his boot. "The crossing takes a toll. You've been unconscious for almost 2 hours. Crossing. The word meant nothing to Adeline. Nothing about this made sense. She scrambled backward on the bed, her legs tangling in sheets that smelled like cedar and smoke. "I need to leave. Right now. I don't know what this is or what you think is happening, but I need to." She reached for her phone, but of course it wasn't here. Nothing was here except this stranger, and his weapons, and his impossible eyes, and the growing certainty in Adeline's chest that she'd finally totally lost her mind. "You can't leave yet," the man said, and his voice was gentle in a way that somehow made everything worse. "The portal won't reopen for at least 3 days, and even then it's unpredictable. But you're safe here, Adeline. I promise you're safe." "How do you know my name?" The question came out sharp, accusatory. Adeline pressed herself against the headboard, her hands curling into fists, even though she had no idea what she'd do if he moved toward her. He was easily twice her size, armed like he was going to war, and looking at her with an expression that sat between recognition and reverence. "I've been dreaming about you for 3 years. He said it like it was a normal thing to say to a stranger who'd just woken up in his bed. "Your face, your voice, your name. The prophecy said you'd come when the time was right, when I needed you most. I've been waiting, Adeline. We've all been waiting." Prophecy, portal, crossing. The words bounced around Adeline's skull like pinballs, refusing to connect into anything resembling sense. "This isn't real," she said, more to herself than to him. "I'm having a stroke, or a psychotic break." I'm in a hospital somewhere having a psychotic break because I spent my entire night stalking my ex and my brain finally just gave up. This is real. He stood up, and Adeline's breath caught because he was even bigger standing, well over 6 feet of solid muscle, barely contained by his medieval outfit. But he didn't move toward her. I know how this must seem. You went to sleep in your world and woke up here in mine. But you were called here, Adeline, pulled across the void between our realms, because you're needed, because you're mine. I'm not anyone's, Adeline snapped, and felt a surge of satisfaction when surprise flickered across his face. And I don't care about your prophecy or your dreams or whatever fantasy you've constructed. I want to go home. I can't send you home. He said it with what sounded like genuine regret. The magic that brought you here isn't something I control. It's older than me, older than this kingdom. You'll be able to return when the portal reopens, but until then. The reality of her situation was starting to penetrate the shock. Adeline looked around the room again and noticed details she'd missed in her initial panic. The tapestries weren't just decorative. They were historical records depicting battles, coronations, and ritual sacrifices. The weapons on the man's body weren't ceremonial. They were worn, well used, marked with the kind of nicks and scratches that came from actual combat. And his eyes, those impossible amber eyes, weren't contact lenses or a trick of the light. They were real, and they were watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. You're trapped here, he said, reading her mind, but not as a prisoner, as my guest, as... He hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. As someone I'm bound to protect with my life. The prophecy was clear about that part. Stop saying prophecy like it means something. Adeline swung her legs off the bed and immediately regretted it when the room tilted sideways. She grabbed the bedpost to steady herself, her head swimming with vertigo. Prophecies aren't real. Magic isn't real. None of this is... She didn't get to finish the sentence because the man crossed the space between them faster than should have been possible and caught her before she could fall. His hands were warm against her arms, his grip firm but careful, and up close, Adeline could smell him. Easy, he murmured, guiding her back to sit on the edge of the bed. The crossing drains you. You need to rest. Let your body adjust to being here. Don't touch me. But Adeline didn't pull away. She stared up at him, this impossible stranger with his weapons, and his scars, and his eyes that looked concerned. Who are you? Cassian Ashford. He released her and took a deliberate step back, giving her space. Alpha King of the Northern Reach, Lord of the Shadowborn Pax, Keeper of the Old Ways. He rattled off the titles like they were just formalities, barely worth mentioning. But you can call me Cassian. We're going to be spending a lot of time together. We're not spending any time together. Adeline wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware that she was wearing nothing but an oversized t-shirt and sleep shorts, the same clothes she'd gone to bed in, which meant her body had somehow made this insane journey intact. You're going to figure out how to open that portal, and I'm going to forget this entire nightmare ever happened. I wish I could. And he sounded like he meant it. Cassian moved back to his chair and sat down with a heavy sigh, looking tired in a way that made him seem almost human. But even if I could open the portal early, I wouldn't. Not yet. You came here because you were summoned, Adeline. Because my kingdom is on the brink of civil war, and the prophecy said that only you could prevent it. That's not my problem. The words came out harsher than she intended, but Adeline was past caring about politeness. I don't know you. I don't know your kingdom. And I definitely don't know anything about preventing civil wars. You've got the wrong person. The prophecy doesn't make mistakes. Cassian leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and for the first time Adeline saw something other than confidence in his expression. He looked uncertain, maybe even a little desperate. 3 years ago, my father was murdered by someone within our own court. I became Alpha King at 28, younger than any king in 5 generations, and half the realm thinks I'm too weak to hold the throne. They're planning to challenge me at the lunar gathering next week, and if I fall, the entire northern reach descends into chaos. Pack against pack, bloodshed that will last for years. That's terrible, Adeline said, and meant it. But it still has nothing to do with me. I'm not a warrior or a politician or whatever you need. I'm a copy editor who can't even get her own life together. You're my mate. Cassian said it quietly, but the words hit like a bomb. The prophecy showed me your face the night my father died. It told me that when the time was right, you'd be pulled from your world into mine, and together we'd be strong enough to unite the packs. You're the missing piece, Adeline, the proof that the old magic still favors my bloodline. The words hung between them, loaded with implications Adeline couldn't begin to process. She laughed, a sharp bark of sound that bordered on hysterical. You think I'm your soulmate because you had some dreams? You realize how insane that sounds, right? In your world, perhaps. Cassian stood again, and this time he moved toward a table near the fireplace. He poured something from a crystal decanter into 2 glasses and brought one to Adeline. Here, it's simply how things work. The moon goddess chooses matches for those of us with alpha blood. She shows us our mates in dreams and visions, and when we meet them in person, the bond solidifies. I felt it the moment you opened your eyes. Adeline took the glass because her throat was desert dry, then immediately regretted it when the liquid inside turned out to be wine. Or something like wine. It tasted like blackberries and smoke and went down far too easily. You felt something. He watched her over the rim of his own glass. The pull, the recognition, even though we've never met. Your body knows mine, Adeline, even if your mind is still catching up. That's just adrenaline, she said, but the protest sounded weak even to her own ears. Truthfully, there was something when he'd touched her. Some electric current that had nothing to do with fear, but rather a bone-deep awareness she'd never experienced before. Not with Marcus, not with anyone. Her body had responded to Cassian Ashford like it recognized him, like it had been waiting for him. If you prefer to believe that, I won't argue. Cassian finished his wine and set the glass down. You must be exhausted. You can sleep here tonight. I'll take one of the guest chambers. In the morning, I'll explain everything properly. You don't have to decide anything right now. Decide what? But Adeline already knew what he was asking. He wanted her to play along with his prophecy, pretend to be his fated mate in front of his court, help him consolidate power so he could prevent a civil war. It was insane. It was impossible. It was also, she realized with sinking certainty, exactly the kind of thing she should say yes to. Because what did she have waiting for her back home? An ex who'd married her best friend, a job she hated, a studio apartment full of unpacked boxes that represented 3 years of going nowhere. At least here she might actually matter to someone. Just sleep, Cassian said, moving toward the door. We'll talk more when you're ready. Wait. Adeline stood up, swaying only slightly this time. If I'm really stuck here for 3 days, I need to know what I'm dealing with. What happens at this lunar gathering? Cassian paused with his hand on the door handle, his broad shoulders tense. The packs gather under the full moon to settle disputes, forge alliances, issue challenges. If someone wants to contest my claim to the throne, that's when they'll do it. And if they succeed... He turned back to face her, and the firelight made his scars stand out in sharp relief. If they succeed, this kingdom tears itself apart. My father spent 30 years building peace between the packs. I won't let his legacy die with him. How would me being here change that? Because a fated mate is proof of divine favor. If the moon goddess herself sent you to me, no one can argue I'm unfit to rule. Your legitimacy. I can't earn any other way, Adeline. You're the difference between peace and war. Adeline sank back onto the bed, her mind racing. And if I just hide in this room for 3 days until the portal opens? Then I'll probably die next week, and you'll have to live with knowing you could have prevented it. He said it matter-of-factly. But I won't force you. Whatever you decide, it has to be your choice. He left before Adeline could respond, pulling the heavy door closed behind him with a soft thud that echoed in the sudden silence. She sat there for a long moment, staring at the fireplace and trying to organize her thoughts into something resembling coherence. She'd gone to bed in Seattle and woken up in what appeared to be a medieval werewolf kingdom where an impossibly attractive king claimed she was his prophesied soulmate. Either she was having the world's most elaborate psychotic break, or magic was real and her boring, disappointing life had just become very complicated. Adeline drained the rest of her wine and lay back on the bed, staring up at the stone ceiling. The rational part of her brain insisted this couldn't be real, that she'd wake up in her studio apartment tomorrow and laugh about whatever hallucination her subconscious had cooked up. But another part, the part that had watched Marcus marry Jessa, that part whispered that maybe this was exactly what she needed, a chance to be someone else, somewhere else, even if it was only for 3 days. She fell asleep still wearing her clothes, too, exhausted to care about propriety or safety. And if she dreamed of amber eyes and scarred hands and the weight of a destiny she never asked for, well, that was nobody's business but her own. Morning came too early and too bright, sunlight streaming through windows Adeline hadn't noticed the night before. She woke disoriented, her body aching like she'd run a marathon, and spent a solid 30 seconds convinced she was back in her apartment before the stone walls reminded her otherwise. Not a dream, then. Still trapped in whatever this was. Someone had left clothes for her while she slept, a simple dress in deep blue wool, soft leather boots, and what looked like a cloak. The dress was surprisingly well fitted, considering no one had taken her measurements, and Adeline tried not to think too hard about the implications of that. She changed quickly, grateful to be wearing something more substantial than her sleep clothes, and was attempting to figure out how the cloak fastened when someone knocked on the door. "Come in," she called, then immediately regretted it when the door opened to reveal not Cassian, but a young woman with copper-colored hair and eyes that gleamed the same unnatural amber. "Lady Adeline." The woman bowed, actually bowed, and Adeline felt her face heat with embarrassment. "I'm Rowan, the king's cousin. He asked me to escort you to breakfast and answer any questions you might have about the court." "I'm not a lady," Adeline said automatically. "Just Adeline is fine." Rowan's smile was warm and slightly amused. "Here, you're the Alpha King's mate. That makes you a lady." She crossed the room and deftly fastened Adeline's cloak with a silver pin shaped like a crescent moon. "There, now you look the part. Shall we?" Adeline followed Rowan out of the bedroom and into a hallway that seemed to stretch forever in both directions. The walls were the same rough stone as the bedroom, but here they were covered with more of those tapestries and interspersed with torches that burned without any visible fuel source. Other people passed them in the hallway. Servants, Adeline assumed, based on their plain clothing and the way they dropped their eyes when Rowan walked by. Several of them stared at Adeline with open curiosity. "They're wondering if you're real," Rowan said quietly. "The king's been talking about your arrival for 3 years. Some people started to think he was making you up." "He sort of was making me up," Adeline pointed out. "He dreamed about me. That's not the same as actually knowing me." "Isn't it?" Rowan glanced at her, those amber eyes sharp and assessing. "The moon goddess doesn't show us dreams without purpose. If Cassian saw you for 3 years, that means you're important. Essential, even." They descended a spiral staircase that made Adeline's head spin, then passed through a massive hall with vaulted ceilings and more of those wolf tapestries. The morning sun streamed through high windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the light. Adeline caught glimpses of what lay beyond the windows, forest, dense and dark, stretching as far as she could see. "Where exactly are we?" she asked. "Geographically, I mean." "The Northern Reach." Rowan pushed open a set of double doors and led Adeline into what appeared to be a dining room. "We're about 200 miles north of the Iron City, which is the closest thing we have to a capital." She was definitely not in Seattle anymore. The dining room was smaller than she'd expected, more intimate, with a long table that could seat maybe 20 people, but currently held only one. Cassian sat at the head of the table, reading something that looked like a letter, and he glanced up when they entered. His expression softened when he saw Adeline, something warm flickering in those impossible eyes. "You slept well, I hope," he said, standing with the kind of old-fashioned courtesy that shouldn't have been charming, but somehow was. "I slept like someone who got pulled through a portal against her will," Adeline replied, and was gratified when Rowan stifled a laugh. "But I'm alive, so I guess that counts for something." More than something. Cassian pulled out the chair to his right, gesturing for Adeline to sit. "Rowan, thank you for escorting her. Will you join us?" "Can't, I'm afraid." Rowan was already backing toward the door. "I'm helping with security preparations for the gathering, but I'll see you both tonight at the council session." She turned to Adeline and her smile turned slightly wicked. Try not to accidentally start any wars before dinner. She left before Adeline could ask what that meant. Cassian waited until the door closed before speaking again. "She likes you. That's good. Rowan doesn't like many people." Adeline sat down and immediately a servant appeared with food. Bread, cheese, something that looked like ham, and fruit she didn't recognize. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since the cereal she'd been consuming when this nightmare started. Cassian dismissed the servant with a nod and poured her what smelled like tea. "I thought we might talk about what happens next, if you're willing to listen." Do I have a choice? But Adeline was already reaching for the bread. Whatever else was happening, the food was real, and she was starving. "You always have a choice." Cassian leaned back in his chair, studying her with that unnerving intensity. "I told you last night, I won't force you to help me, but I'd like to at least explain what I'm asking, so you can make an informed decision." "Fine. Explain." Adeline bit into the bread and nearly moaned. It was fresh, warm, and tasted like actual wheat instead of the stale discount loaves she was used to. "But I'm not promising anything." "Fair enough." Cassian set down his tea and folded his hands on the table. "The Northern Reach is made up of 7 major packs, each with their own territory and hierarchy. My bloodline, the Ashfords, have held the position of Alpha King for 6 generations. We're the neutral arbiters, the ones who settle disputes and maintain peace between the packs. But 3 years ago, my father was poisoned during a diplomatic dinner. We never found out who did it, which means there's a traitor in the court. Someone who benefits from chaos. And you think this person will challenge you at the lunar gathering? I know they will. I've had 2 attempts on my life in the past month alone." He said it casually, like assassination attempts were just an inconvenient part of his day. "The problem is that I can't prove who's behind it, and without proof, I can't act. If I start executing people based on suspicion, I'm no better than a tyrant." Adeline swallowed her bread and reached for more. "So where do I come in?" "You're proof that the old magic still supports my claim to the throne. The prophecy about you has been public knowledge for 3 years. Everyone knows I've been waiting for my fated mate to appear. Your arrival, right before the gathering, is too perfectly timed to be coincidence. It's a sign." "Or it's just a coincidence," Adeline countered. "You said yourself the portal is unpredictable. Maybe I got pulled here completely at random, and you're reading meaning into something that doesn't exist." "Maybe." Cassian picked up his tea again, cradling the cup between his large hands. "But I don't think so. I felt the bond snap into place when you woke up yesterday, Adeline. I know you felt it too. That's not random. That's fate." Adeline had been trying very hard not to think about the electric awareness she felt whenever Cassian was in the room, the way her body seemed to lean toward him without her permission. She told herself it was just proximity and stress and the lingering effects of whatever magic had pulled her here. "Let's say I believe you," she said slowly. "What exactly do you need me to do?" "Attend the lunar gathering with me. Stand by my side during the challenges. Show the court that we're bonded, that the moon goddess has chosen me as king." Cassian's expression was earnest, almost pleading. "You don't have to fight or make speeches or do anything you're not comfortable with. Just be there. Be mine. At least publicly. For 3 days. And then the portal opens and I go home? And then the portal opens, and you can choose to go home, Cassian corrected. If that's what you want. There was something in the way he said it. Some undercurrent Adeline couldn't quite interpret. Like he already knew she wouldn't want to leave. If I do this, she said carefully, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing it because I believe in prophecies, or fated mates, or any of that. I'm doing it because you're asking for my help, and I don't want to watch a kingdom destroy itself when I could have prevented it. This is temporary, transactional. Don't read anything more into it than that. Understood. But Cassian was smiling, a slow, satisfied smile that made Adeline's stomach flutter in a way she refused to analyze. I'll take what you're willing to give. They finished breakfast in relative silence, Adeline eating more than she'd intended while Cassian worked through the stack of letters that seemed to require his attention. She caught herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, noticing small details she'd missed in last night's panic. The way his jaw clenched when he read something that displeased him. The scar through his eyebrow that gave him a permanently skeptical expression. The casual competence with which he handled a knife when slicing fruit, like violence was just another tool in his repertoire. He looked up and caught her staring. Something on your mind? Just trying to figure you out. Adeline pushed her plate away. You're not what I expected an alpha king to be like. What did you expect? I don't know. More arrogant? More demanding? You don't owe me anything. Cassian set down his papers. You were pulled from your life without warning or consent. The least I can do is treat you like a person instead of a political tool. Most people in your position wouldn't see it that way. I'm not most people. His eyes held hers, amber and intense. And you're not a tool, Adeline. You're my mate. Even if you don't believe it yet, I do. That means your happiness matters to me. Your comfort matters. I won't trap you in a role you don't want, no matter how much easier it would make my life. The sincerity in his voice made Adeline's chest tight. When was the last time someone had cared about her happiness? Marcus certainly hadn't, too focused on his own timeline and priorities to notice when Adeline stopped smiling. Her parents were proud of her in the abstract, but baffled by her actual choices. And her friends, well, Jessa had proven exactly how much Adeline's friendship mattered when she'd slept with Marcus 3 weeks after the breakup. Thank you, she said quietly. For that. For not being a complete asshole about this situation. The bar is remarkably low, Cassian observed, but he was smiling. Come on, I want to show you something before the council session tonight. He led her out of the dining room and through more winding corridors, these ones lit by actual sunlight streaming through narrow windows. They climbed another staircase, this one spiraling up instead of down, and emerged onto a wide balcony that overlooked the entire compound. Adeline's breath caught. From up here, she could see the full scope of Cassian's kingdom, the massive stone fortress they currently stood in, surrounded by smaller buildings that must be homes or workshops, all of it enclosed by walls that looked like they could withstand a siege. Beyond the walls was nothing but forest stretching to the horizon, broken only by a river that gleamed like silver in the morning light. It's beautiful, she said, and meant it. It's home. Cassian came to stand beside her at the railing, close enough that his shoulder almost brushed hers. My great-great-grandfather built this place as a sanctuary, somewhere the Pax could come when they needed neutral ground, protection from external threats. It's withstood 2 wars, and countless smaller conflicts. I won't be the one who lets it fall. Adeline heard the weight in those words. She understood that pressure intimately. Her parents had spent her entire childhood building expectations she'd ultimately failed to meet. But at least her failures had only disappointed 2 people. Cassian was carrying the weight of an entire kingdom on his shoulders. You said your father was murdered, she said quietly. Do you have any idea who did it? 3 suspects, all high-ranking members of the court, all with motives. Cassian's hands tightened on the railing. Thaddeus wants to expand his pack's territory, and my father kept blocking him. Serafina lost a mate challenge ruling that went against her, and she's been bitter ever since. And Marcus Wolfhart. He paused, something complicated crossing his face. Marcus was my father's closest advisor. He was there the night he died. If anyone had opportunity, it was him. But you don't want to believe it was him. He helped raise me after my mother died. He's been like a second father. Cassian's jaw clenched. But I can't let personal loyalty blind me to the truth. If Marcus killed my father, he'll pay for it. After I have proof. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the forest sway in the wind. Adeline thought about her own life, the small betrayals that had seemed so devastating at the time. Marcus cheating on her with Jessa had felt like the end of the world, but at least no one had died. At least the consequences had been contained to her own broken heart. I'm sorry, she said finally, about your father, about all of this. Thank you. Cassian turned to face her, and the morning light made his scars stand out in sharp relief. For what it's worth, I'm sorry too, about pulling you into this. You deserved a choice. Yeah, well, I've been making choices my whole life, and most of them have been terrible. Adeline surprised herself with a laugh. Maybe letting fate decide for once isn't the worst thing. Something shifted in Cassian's expression, something warm and almost hopeful. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was light, barely there, but Adeline felt it in her entire body. The council session is at sunset, he said quietly. They'll want to meet you, assess whether you're really my mate. It won't be pleasant. What do I need to know? Just stay close to me. Answer honestly when they ask you questions, but don't feel obligated to share more than you're comfortable with. And if anyone challenges you, his expression hardened. If anyone even thinks about challenging you, they'll answer to me. The protective edge in his voice sent a shiver down Adeline's spine. She told herself it was just the cold wind, nothing to do with the massive werewolf king standing inches away and looking at her like she was something precious he'd finally found after years of searching. I should probably prepare, she said, stepping back and breaking the moment. I need to at least look the part. You already look the part. But Cassian let her go, his hand dropping back to his side. Rowan will help you get ready. I'll come find you when it's time. The council session was held in a hall even larger than the dining room, with a raised dais at one end where Cassian's throne sat, an imposing chair carved from dark wood and inlaid with silver. Adeline stood beside the throne wearing the dress Rowan had helped her into, a deep burgundy gown that laced up the back and made her feel like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. The hall filled quickly as the sun sank toward the horizon. Adeline watched dozens of people file in, all of them wearing the same kind of medieval-style clothing that seemed to be standard here. But unlike the servants she'd seen earlier, these people moved with predatory grace. Their eyes gleamed amber or gold in the lamplight, and several of them studied Adeline with open hostility. Remember, Rowan whispered beside her, you're the Alpha King's mate. That makes you second only to Cassian in terms of authority. Don't let them intimidate you. Too late, Adeline muttered, but she straightened her spine and tried to look like someone who belonged here. Cassian entered from a side door, flanked by 2 guards. He looked every inch the king, powerful and commanding, and when his eyes found Adeline's across the room, something in her chest tightened. He climbed the dais and settled into his throne, then held out his hand to Adeline. The gesture was clear. She was meant to stand beside him, to present a united front to the assembled court. Adeline took his hand and let him guide her to her place at his right side. His grip was warm, solid, anchoring. She felt the buzz of that strange connection between them. The bond he insisted was real, and for the first time allowed herself to consider that maybe he was right. Maybe this wasn't just stress or magic side effects. Maybe she really was connected to this impossible man in ways she couldn't explain.
My lords and ladies.
Cassian's voice rang out across the hall, commanding instant silence.
As you know, 3 years ago I received a prophecy from the moon goddess herself.
She showed me my fated mate, the woman who would stand beside me as Luna Queen, and she promised me that this woman would appear when the time was right. He paused, his hand tightening slightly around Adeline's. 2 nights ago, the portal opened, and Adeline Hale crossed from her world into ours, fulfilling the prophecy exactly as foretold. The murmuring started immediately, a low rumble of speculation and doubt. Adeline felt dozens of eyes on her, assessing, judging, looking for any sign that she was a fraud.
How convenient, a voice called from the back of the hall, that your mate appears just days before the lunar gathering, when your claim to the throne is most vulnerable.
A man stepped forward from the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered with silver-streaked hair and eyes that burned with challenge. Thaddeus, Adeline remembered, one of Cassian's suspects.
The moon goddess has perfect timing.
Cassian's tone was pleasant, but his eyes had gone cold.
Or you've manufactured a lie.
Thaddeus climbed the steps to the dais, stopping just short of challenging distance.
Forgive my skepticism, Alpha King, but you'll understand why some of us question whether this woman is truly your fated mate or simply an actress playing a role.
Thaddeus raises a fair point, Cassian said calmly. The bond between mates is sacred, and claiming one falsely is a grave offense. So let me offer proof. He turned to Adeline, his expression softening. May I? Adeline had no idea what he was asking permission for, but she nodded anyway. Cassian lifted his hand to her face, cupping her cheek gently, and the moment his skin made contact with hers, something happened. Light erupted from where they touched, silver and gold intertwining in patterns that seemed to dance in the air around them. Adeline gasped as warmth flooded through her, starting from Cassian's hand and spreading through her entire body like liquid sunshine. She felt him in her head, in her heart, in places she didn't have names for. Felt his fierce protectiveness and his fear of failing his people and his desperate, aching loneliness that had been eating away at him for years. And underneath all of it, binding everything together like a golden thread, was the bond. Real, undeniable, humming with power that made Adeline's knees weak. The light faded gradually, leaving her breathless and shaking. Cassian steadied her with his free hand, his eyes searching hers. Okay, he murmured, too quiet for anyone else to hear. What the hell was that? Adeline whispered back. Proof. He turned back to face the court, his hand still cupping her face in an unmistakably possessive gesture. The mate bond, visible for all to see. Silence. Even Thaddeus looked shaken, his challenge dying on his lips. The assembled court stared at Adeline and Cassian with a mixture of awe and wariness. The bond is real, an elderly woman said from the front row, her voice carrying authority. I've lived 80 years, and I've never seen a false bond produce that kind of resonance. The moon goddess has indeed chosen. Cassian finally released Adeline's face, though he kept her hand firmly in his. Are there any other challenges to my mate's legitimacy? No one spoke. Victory, Adeline realized. They'd just won the first battle without throwing a single punch. But the session was far from over. For the next 2 hours, Adeline stood beside Cassian's throne while he heard petitions and settled disputes and dealt with the 1,000 small crises that apparently came with ruling a kingdom. She tried to pay attention, to learn the names and faces of the people who mattered, but her mind kept drifting back to that moment when the bond had flared to life. It felt real. More than real. It felt inevitable, like finding a missing puzzle piece she hadn't known she'd lost. And that terrified her more than anything else about this situation, because if the bond was real, if she really was cosmically tied to Cassian Ashford, then leaving in 3 days was going to hurt in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. The session finally ended as full darkness fell. The court filed out in small groups, still whispering about the light show they'd witnessed.
"You did well,"
Cassian said, turning to her with genuine warmth in his expression.
"I know that wasn't easy."
"That was the easy part?" Adeline laughed weakly. "What's the hard part?"
"The lunar gathering.
3 days of challenges, negotiations, and political theater, while everyone watches to see if our bond holds under pressure." He stood and offered her his hand again.
"But you don't have to worry about that tonight. Come, I'll walk you back to your room."
They made their way through the fortress in comfortable silence, Rowan trailing a discreet distance behind them as an escort. Adeline was grateful for the quiet. Her head was spinning with everything she'd seen and heard, and she needed time to process it without an audience. When they reached her door, Cassian paused.
"Adeline, I should have warned you what the bond display would feel like. I didn't mean to overwhelm you."
"It's fine." Though it wasn't, not really. It was just intense.
"It was real."
Cassian stepped closer, his voice dropping to something intimate and rough.
"Everything you felt from me, that's the truth. I'm not playing games with you, Adeline. I'm not Marcus."
The name hit her like cold water. "How do you—"
"I felt you too, when the bond opened.
Felt your heartbreak and your anger, and your certainty that you're not good enough." His hand came up to cup her face again, gentler this time.
"But you're wrong about that. You're more than good enough. You're everything."
Adeline's eyes stung with sudden tears. No one had ever talked to her like that. Like she was precious instead of disappointing.
"You don't even know me. Then let me know you."
Cassian's thumb brushed her cheekbone, catching a tear before it could fall. 3 days until the portal opens. That's 3 days for you to decide if you want to go home to a life that makes you miserable, or stay here with someone who already knows you're extraordinary. That's not fair. You can't just offer me a fantasy and expect me to forget about my real life.
"I'm not offering you a fantasy, I'm offering you a choice."
He leaned down, his forehead nearly touching hers.
"And I'm asking you to at least consider that maybe your real life has been the fantasy, the one where you make yourself small and quiet and convenient for people who don't appreciate you. Maybe this is real. Maybe I'm real.
And maybe that scares you more than any of the magic, prophecies, or politics." He was right. Adeline hated that he could see through her defenses so easily. She'd spent years building walls around her heart, protecting herself from the kind of vulnerability that had let Marcus destroy her. And here was Cassian Ashford, demolishing those walls in less than 2 days, with nothing but honesty and impossible amber eyes. "I need time," she said finally. "To think, to figure out what I want without you looking at me like that."
"Like what?"
"Like I'm already yours." Cassian smiled, slow and knowing.
"That's because you are. You just haven't accepted it yet."
He pressed a kiss to her forehead, chaste and gentle.
"Sleep well, Adeline. Tomorrow we begin preparing for the gathering."
He left before she could argue, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Adeline slipped into her room and closed the door, then slid down to sit with her back against it, her heart hammering in her chest. 3 days. She had 3 days to decide if she was brave enough to risk her heart on a man she barely knew, in a world that shouldn't exist, for a future that defied every logical thought in her head. Adeline pressed her hands to her face and let herself cry. For Marcus. For the years she'd wasted. For the fear that maybe Cassian was right and she'd been living a fantasy all along. And underneath the tears, barely acknowledged but growing stronger, was a tiny seed of hope. Maybe she didn't have to go home. Maybe home was right here, waiting for her to claim it. The next 2 days passed in a blur. Cassian kept his promise to give Adeline space, but he was constantly present in small ways, a hand at her back during meals, quiet conversations in corners where they thought no one was watching, stolen moments on the balcony where he'd first shown her his kingdom. And through it all, the bond hummed between them, growing stronger with every touch, every shared glance, every piece of himself that Cassian offered up without reservation. Adeline learned about the court's politics from Rowan,
who proved to be both fiercely loyal to Cassian and refreshingly blunt about the kingdom's problems. She learned that Thaddeus had been challenging Cassian's authority since the day he took the throne, that Seraphina was beautiful and deadly, and had wanted to be Cassian's queen long before Adeline showed up. She learned that Marcus Wolfhart, the third suspect, rarely appeared in court anymore, keeping to his own territory and communicating only through letters. And she learned that the lunar gathering was even more dangerous than Cassian had let on. "It's not just political challenges," Rowan explained as she helped Adeline prepare for their departure the next morning. "There will be combat trials, tests of strength. Cassian will have to prove himself repeatedly, and if he fails, even once, his authority crumbles," Adeline finished. "I got that part. What I don't get is how me being there helps." "Because you're his Luna." Rowan's hands were gentle as she braided Adeline's hair in an elaborate style that apparently marked her as royalty. "Alpha kings are stronger with their mates at their side. It's not just symbolic. The bond actually enhances his abilities, makes him faster, more powerful, harder to kill. So I'm basically a supernatural battery. You're a partner." Rowan met her eyes in the mirror. "There's a difference." The gathering was held in a massive clearing deep in the forest, where 7 stone pillars marked the territories of the 7 major packs. Hundreds of wolves had already gathered when Cassian and Adeline arrived, their vehicles pulling up to a makeshift camp that looked like something between a medieval fair and a military encampment. Adeline felt every eye on her as she climbed out of the car, Cassian's hand warm and steady at her back. The assembled wolves watched her with a mixture of curiosity and hostility, their supernatural senses no doubt cataloging every detail about her, measuring her, judging whether she was worthy of their alpha king. "Ignore them," Cassian murmured in her ear. "You have nothing to prove to anyone except yourself." But Adeline couldn't ignore them, especially not when Seraphina appeared from the crowd like a dark angel, all flowing black hair and curves that her dress showed off to devastating effect. She smiled when she saw Cassian, the kind of smile that promised things Adeline didn't want to think about. "Cassian, how lovely to see you." Seraphina's eyes slid to Adeline, and her smile sharpened. "And this must be the prophesied mate. How quaint." "Seraphina." Cassian's tone was neutral, but Adeline felt tension coil in his body. "I trust your pack as well." "Thriving, as always." Seraphina circled them slowly, predatory and deliberate. "Though I must admit, I'm curious about your mate's qualifications. She's human, isn't she? Or at least, not wolf. How exactly does that work with your bond?" "That's none of your concern," Cassian said flatly. "Oh, but it is. You see, I've been studying the old laws, and there's a fascinating clause about mates who can't shift. Something about how they can be challenged for the position if another wolf proves themselves more suitable." Seraphina's smile was pure poison. "I'm sure it won't come to that, of course. I'm sure your human is perfectly adequate." "Back off, Seraphina," Rowan snapped, appearing at Adeline's other side. "Unless you want to formally issue a challenge and deal with the consequences." "Maybe I do." Seraphina's eyes glowed briefly, her wolf rising to the surface. "The gathering is the perfect place for challenges, after all. Then save it for the arena." Cassian's voice dropped to a growl. "Touch my mate outside the formal challenges, and I'll consider it an act of war against my bloodline. Are we clear?" Seraphina held his gaze for a long moment, then finally looked away, acknowledging his dominance. "Crystal clear, Alpha King. I look forward to the trials." She turned and melted back into the crowd, leaving a tension thick enough to cut. "Well," Adeline said shakily, "she seems nice." Cassian's laugh was rough. "She's going to challenge you, probably tomorrow, during the mate trials." "I'm sorry, Adeline. I should have anticipated this." "What are mate trials?" "Exactly what they sound like. Any wolf who questions Aluna's right to her position can challenge her to prove she's worthy." Rowan's expression was grim. "Usually it's just ceremonial. Answer some questions, demonstrate knowledge of pack law. but Seraphina's going to push for combat. Combat? Adeline's stomach dropped. I can't fight a werewolf. I'm human. I don't even know how to throw a punch properly. You won't have to. Cassian turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to grip her shoulders. The old laws allow a mate's champion to fight on her behalf. I'll handle Seraphina. She won't touch you. But if you fight her, you're using energy you need for the other challenges. Adeline had been paying attention these past 2 days. She understood the strategy now. She's trying to wear you down before the real threats come. I don't care. I won't risk you. Maybe you should. The words surprised Adeline as much as they seemed to surprise Cassian. Maybe I should fight my own battles. I'm not saying I'll win. I'm not even saying I want to do this. But if I'm going to be your Luna, if I'm going to stay here, she caught herself, realizing what she'd just admitted. I need to prove I'm not just hiding behind you, that I'm choosing this, actively. Cassian stared at her for a long moment, his amber eyes searching hers. Then slowly, his expression shifted to something that looked like fierce pride. You want to stay. Adeline swallowed hard. I haven't decided yet, but I'm considering it. And if I do stay, I want it to be on my terms, as your equal, not your protected pet. You've always been my equal. Cassian pulled her close, heedless of the watching crowd. But if you want to face Seraphina, I won't stop you. I'll teach you enough to survive, and I'll be right there ready to step in if things go wrong. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Cassian taught Adeline basic defensive moves, showing her how to use an opponent's momentum against them, where to strike to disable without killing. Rowan joined them, adding tips from her own combat experience, and by the time night fell, Adeline's body ached in places she didn't know could ache. But she felt stronger, more capable, like maybe she actually could survive in this world, even without magic or supernatural abilities. That night, the packs gathered for the opening ceremony. Adeline stood beside him, her hand in his, and felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. When the ceremony ended and the packs dispersed to their camps, Cassian walked Adeline to the tent that had been prepared for them. It was surprisingly spacious, with a bed large enough for 2 and thick furs to keep out the cold. You don't have to stay here if you're not comfortable, Cassian said, pausing at the entrance. I can sleep elsewhere. Stay! Adeline surprised herself with how much she meant it. Unless you don't want to. I want to. He stepped inside it and suddenly the tent felt very small. I've wanted to since the moment you opened your eyes in my bed. They stood there in the lamplight, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Adeline thought about the portal, about the choice she'd have to make in less than 24 hours. I'm terrified, she admitted quietly. Of this, of you, of what it means if I choose to stay. I know. Cassian closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face. I'm terrified, too, of losing you, of not being enough to make you want to stay, of waking up and finding out you chose your old life because at least that was familiar. That life was killing me. The truth spilled out before Adeline could stop it. Slowly, quietly, but it was killing me. I was 29 years old, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt anything except numb. And now? Now I'm terrified, which is at least a feeling, but I don't know if that's progress. It is. Cassian's thumb brushed her cheekbone, that same gentle gesture he'd made on their first night. You're feeling again, choosing again, fighting again. She kissed him, just leaned up and pressed her lips to his, surprising them both. The bond flared to life immediately, golden warmth flooding through her as Cassian made a rough sound in his throat and deepened the kiss. His arms came around her, pulling her flush against him, and Adeline felt all that barely leashed power, all that careful control, trembling on the edge of breaking. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cassian rested his forehead against hers. Tell me you'll stay. Tell me you'll choose this. Ask me again after I survive Seraphina tomorrow. But Adeline was smiling, something bright and terrifying, yet wonderful, blooming in her chest. They lay down together, Adeline curled against Cassian's chest, with his arms wrapped protectively around her. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the gathered packs, laughter and howls, and the crackling of fires. Tomorrow would bring challenges and danger and Seraphina's promised trial. But tonight, Adeline let herself feel safe. Let herself imagine what it might be like to stay in this impossible world with this impossible man. Let herself fall asleep choosing him, over and over, in 1,000 small ways that added up to something that felt suspiciously like love. The mate trial took place at noon, in the largest clearing where all 7 packs could watch. Adeline stood in the center of a ritual circle marked with stones, wearing leather armor that Rowan had helped her into. Her heart hammered against her ribs as Seraphina entered from the opposite side. Already shifted halfway to her wolf form, claws extended, eyes glowing, moving with predatory grace. "Any last words, human?" Seraphina called out, her voice distorted by the shift. Adeline rolled her shoulders, trying to calm her nerves. "Try not to kill me too quickly. I'd like this to at least look like a fair fight." Seraphina's laugh was cruel. Then she moved. The next few minutes were a blur of movement and pain. Seraphina was fast, so much faster than Adeline had anticipated, and despite everything Cassian had taught her, she barely managed to avoid the first strike. Claws raked across her arm, drawing blood, and the crowd roared its approval. Adeline rolled away, came up in a defensive crouch like Cassian had shown her. "Don't try to win," he'd said. "Just survive long enough to prove you're not helpless. Show them you belong here." Seraphina came at her again, and this time Adeline was ready. She ducked under the swing, used Seraphina's momentum to spin her around, and managed to land a solid kick to her opponent's ribs. It wasn't much, barely slowed Seraphina down, but the crowd's roar changed timbre. Surprise instead of bloodlust. They circled each other, Seraphina reassessing. "You've got some fight in you after all. Too bad it won't be enough." She shifted fully then, becoming a massive black wolf with eyes like coals. Adeline's breath caught because this was it. The moment when she'd have to somehow survive, a supernatural predator with nothing but determination and the basic combat moves she'd learned in 2 days. The wolf lunged and Adeline dove sideways, her hands finding one of the ritual stones. She swung it without thinking, connecting with the wolf's head hard enough to make Seraphina yelp and stumble. Blood matted her dark fur. The crowd went absolutely silent. Adeline stood there, stone still clutched in her shaking hands, and stared down at the wolf she'd just hit. Seraphina could kill her now. One bite, one slash of those claws, and it would be over. The trial didn't have rules against killing, only against outside interference. But Seraphina shifted back to human, blood running down her temple, and something like respect flickered in her expression. "Yield or continue?" she asked, the formal words of challenge. Adeline should yield. She'd proven herself enough. But that seed of hope in her chest had grown into something fierce and stubborn, and she found herself saying, "Continue." Seraphina smiled, sharp and approving. "Good. Let's make this interesting." They fought for another 10 minutes, Adeline taking hit after hit, but refusing to stay down. Her lips split. Her ribs screamed. Her vision blurred with blood from a cut above her eye. But she kept getting up, kept swinging, kept proving that she was more than just Cassian's prophesied mate. She was a fighter in her own right. Finally, Seraphina had her pinned, one hand at her throat. "Yield," she said, but there was no triumph in her voice, just acknowledgement. "You've proven yourself enough." "I yield." The words tasted like victory despite the loss. Seraphina released her and stood, offering Adeline her hand. When Adeline took it, letting her enemy help her to her feet, the gathered packs erupted in howls.
Not mockery, but approval. "You're tougher than you look, human," Serafina said quietly. "Cassian chose well." Then she was gone, melting back into the crowd, and Cassian was there, his hands gentle as he checked Adeline's injuries. "You should have let me fight," he said, but his voice was thick with pride. "Where's the fun in that?" Adeline swayed, and he caught her, supporting her weight. "Did I do okay?" "You were magnificent." He kissed her forehead, heedless of the watching crowd. "My fierce, stubborn, absolutely magnificent mate." The rest of the gathering passed in a blur. Cassian faced his own challenges. Combat trials against other alphas, tests of knowledge and wisdom, political negotiations that required every ounce of his authority. And through it all, Adeline stood by his side, battered but unbroken. As the sun set on the final day, as the portal's opening time drew near, Cassian pulled Adeline away from the celebrations. They walked into the forest, just the two of them, until they found a quiet clearing where moonlight filtered through the trees. "It's almost time," he said quietly. "The portal opens in an hour." Adeline's heart hammered in her chest. "So I'm asking, one last time." Cassian took both her hands in his amber eyes intense in the moonlight. "Stay with me. Choose this world. This life. Choose me." "I already chose," she said, and watched hope bloom across Cassian's face. "I chose when I decided to fight Serafina. I chose every time I stood beside you instead of hiding. I've been choosing you for days, Cassian. I just needed time to realize it." He kissed her, and this time there was nothing gentle about it. This was claim and promise and relief, all wrapped into one desperate embrace. The bond blazed between them, golden and perfect, settling into something permanent. When they finally broke apart, Cassian pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you," he said. "I've loved you since the first moment you opened your eyes and looked at me like I was insane." "I still think you're a little insane," but Adeline was smiling through her tears. "And I love you anyway. I don't know how this happened so fast, or why the universe thought pulling me through a portal was an acceptable dating strategy, but I'm here. I'm staying." They walked back to the camp hand in hand, and when the portal opened, a shimmer of impossible light in the air, offering Adeline one last chance to return to her old life. She didn't even hesitate. She watched it close without regret, without looking back. She was home. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts, and if you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people hear these stories.